for me, one of the truisms that I believe is you hire for character and teach skill. Um, I just have over and over again found that the character side can't be taught near as much. It can be kind of, but it's a much longer process, and I'm much more. I've had greater success in my career by surrounding myself that are with people that have high integrity first, and maybe don't know how to do something and teach them that, than vice versa.
Hey, folks, welcome to another episode of Human First Leadership. I'm Connor Drake, Senior Coach at Mindmaven, where we help startup leaders and VCs 10x their productivity and achieve true greatness through relationships. Today, I am thrilled to be joined by Kent Halliburton, co-founder and CEO of Sazmining, a company connecting individuals with renewable energy data centers, or Bitcoin mining, ultimately transforming how people relate to money and energy. And welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks so much, Connor. It's a pleasure to be here.
Oh, likewise. Thrilled to have you here. And I want to get into your leadership and how you've built your company. But before we do, why don't we start with a little bit of background? How'd you first get into Bitcoin and what pulled you into this space?
Oh boy, very circuitous path, I would say. And so I'll give you a little bit of my journey here. So I did computer engineering in college and then went into rooftop solar. And I mentioned those two things because computer engineering was a core focus on networking there. And then rooftop solar energy was clearly about energy and how the grid works. And those two things wound up being predecessors for understanding Bitcoin quickly. So I took a 2 year sabbatical between my rooftop solar degree and kind of the entrepreneurial journey I'm on now, and traveled fairly extensively. And along the way, I discovered Bitcoin. And the energy, because Bitcoin has a component of energy to it, and then the networking side, I had an aha moment. And the more I studied it, the more I realized, oh my gosh, like I need to put my life force, my energy and effort behind participating in this, because I didn't see anything that was more transformative and could help reestablish humanity's relationship with the planet in a more fruitful way. I know that sounds odd because that's not the narrative that's popularly heard out there, but you get to that point, and almost every Bitcoiner I know has that attitude after studying it for a minimum of 100 hours, because it's a 0 to 1 innovation that defies. It breaks a paradigm that's 5,000 years old for humanity. So it's not surprising that it's taking a while for people to wrap their heads around it. But the only way to wrap your head around it is to put in the time and work, and the people that do earlier are being rewarded, and that makes other people envious. And so there's some challenges with that as well. But I digress. I got into I studied Bitcoin and realized the power that it had to be transformative. Wanted to put my shoulder against that particular wheel and help drive adoption. And eventually, the entrepreneurial journey and my energy background led me to Sazmining, where we actually are challenging exchanges for the primacy of how people acquire their Bitcoin. So what Bitcoin mining actually is the way that the decentralized ledger of Bitcoin is secured, or new blocks are created, which create a form of security. And so what do I mean? Let me back up and just describe Bitcoin at a super high level, because unfortunately, Bitcoin is a protocol that has been badly maligned and made into a political football for many. And so if we just back up to the fact that it's a protocol, most people can't imagine being angry at HTTP, but if you're angry about Bitcoin, you're kind of being angry at HTTP.
Mm.
It's just a protocol.
Hmm.
How people are choosing to use it is a different thing, but it's just a protocol. And so I like to just bring it back to that level of simplicity so people can understand that it's a protocol that enables a decentralized ledger. And what I mean by that is there's tens of thousands of copies of this ledger, and a ledger is just a copy of who transferred what to whom and when. And there's just this decentralized version of it. 10,000, I believe we're at about 20,000 at this last time I checked, but there's tens of thousands of these ledgers that are decentralized across the entire planet. And those ledgers are staying in sync through Bitcoin's blockchain. So that's all it is. That's all Bitcoin is a decentralized ledger. And the way that the new blocks are created, which are how blocks of transactions are propagated across this decentralized ledger, is what mining does. And that mining effort requires energy, and that energy is what secures the decentralized ledger. So it's actually quite simple. And so what we do is we find data centers and we allow with low cost power. It's all hydropower for reference, and we get those set up, and then we fill those with clients seeking access to that rack space with mining hardware. Because when you mine, you generate new Bitcoin, and that's the reward for putting in the energy and effort to mine as fresh Bitcoin off the network. And so we enable that through a Bitcoin mining as a service platform, making it very simple for people to purchase a mining rig through us. We get it deployed on a rack in our data center, and they provide us their Bitcoin address, and they receive the Bitcoin rewards. We have a unique way that we make money with that process, but it's something like Bitcoin mining is like Bitcoin is sort of mystifying for a lot of people, and Bitcoin mining, it turns out to be even more mystifying. So, but when I break it down and describe it for most people, like, okay, that's like AWS, right? There's a server there, and I'm using computational power, and I get the fruits of my labor for whatever I'm using the computational power for.
I definitely would have fallen into that camp of being mystified by a lot of it. So I appreciate the breakdown. I think that helps me a lot and will help our listeners. And I think one thing that's very obvious to anyone listening now is that it's obvious this is something that's very mission driven for you. It's clear it's something you're very passionate about. It's not just an opportunity you saw that you latched onto because it seemed profitable, although that's of course a big side of building any business. But it's clear that you're very, very mission driven. And there's probably a transformation that took place for you over the initial 100 hours of researching Bitcoin to wherever you're at now, probably thousands upon thousands of hours. I'm curious if you're delved into that world and your understanding of money and resources now. Has that shaped the way that you think about leadership and building a team?
I would say it's not a direct connection, but yes. So you're absolutely right. This is a mission-driven opportunity for me. I can go more into that, but I think it's a bit of a distraction from the question that you're asking. But it took me researching Bitcoin to ultimately confront the fact that I didn't know the answer to the question, what is money? Even though here is this thing that I was using on a day in, day out basis. And I actually believe that 50, 100 years from now, we will turn back and look at the particular period where we are in and recognize what is money as the defining question of our era. Because it's the collective amnesia that we have around that answer that has put us into the predicament that we have, where most of us feel like we can barely make ends meet and are racing as fast as we can day in, day out, with very little time, and not being able to spend the amount of time we'd ideally like with the people we love and care about in our lives. So I see Bitcoin as a solution to bring us back to a more normalized reality. And so, yeah, that is very mission driven. What I would say from a leadership standpoint, though, is that it's because our money was separated from the laws of physics in 1971, it became a story or a narrative at that point, without a tie to physical reality. We've become untethered as a society, and unmoored. And working in Bitcoin, the Bitcoin community is, I think, the first to sort of land back on reality, and that as a result, there's kind of a slowing down that happens with my leadership style, and to focus on the human to human relationships instead of being as focused on people being cogs in a machine that we're making and growing for the future. I don't know if, and I say that because my career in rooftop solar was very much more the former, where I saw people as, okay, I'm moving people around within the organization to achieve the maximum profitability. And while that's important, just having a shift in my time horizons by studying Bitcoin has led to a situation where I think about the relationships I have with these people as, hey, these are part of my tribe, and I want to be around these people for a very long time.
And I'm so glad you used that language of tribe. 'Cause I think if you boil humanity down to its core essence, we're relational by nature. That's a big part of what we teach and preach and coach on. It's, rebuilding that tribe. It's investing into relationships, seeing people as people, whether it's team members, it's your family, it's your network. And if I remember right, Sazmining, you're a fully distributed team across the U.S., Europe, South America. Am I remembering that right?
You have it directly correct. So yeah, we're spread out between those three continents pretty equally, actually.
Mm-hmm.
And our time zones go from Pacific to Central European, and it works well for us as a team, this dynamic, because if you look at how we operate, we partner with data centers in different locations. Right now, that the data centers are on three continents, and possibly by the time this airs, we'll be in four continents, because we're looking very closely at Ethiopia at the moment. But because we have this geographic distribution of our data centers, and our main product is being shipped from China to these data centers, there doesn't physically have to be a specific location for us to exist in. And I have had an odd career in that when I got into rooftop solar, that was sort of the first career out of college. And when I got into that career, I was working in sales. And sales in that career was in-home sales. You'd go to somebody's home, you would talk to them about a solar system, provide a quote, and ultimately, get a contract signed if it all works out. And that did not require an office. So starting from 2005 till now, I've never worked in an office environment. So it's kind of like, it's sort of business native for me to work in a remote only environment. And it's interesting because I didn't realize that about myself until COVID hit. And then everybody started to talk about the remote only environment, how hard it was, this and that. And I was like, wait, that's just my normal. I guess this is something I'm lucky to be able to have. But yeah, there's some things that have to be done to build a culture in that environment. But it's very much possible to do. And I think that the biggest key that I've learned in trying to build a quality culture and team in that environment is the hiring practice has to be absolutely critical to bring the right people in to begin with.
Okay, let's dig into that a little bit. I'd love to hear about that hiring process. What does that look like? How do you find people who fit into the culture you've tried to build?
Um, So, I mean, first of all, being in Bitcoin, there's a lot of people that are mission driven, right? In this sort of sector. So that helps, right? So we get people that are already, by the time they're applying, looking at this from a similar value set as the rest of the team. So that's step one that helps. Step two is making sure to go through something I didn't do in my past, but highly recommend, is a objective personality assessment. So some sort of testing criteria that removes any of your personal bias and can let you look at somebody for who they are, specifically what character attributes that they're going to bring to your team. And I know that sounds maybe a little bit dehumanizing to have to to go through that on the other end, but I found for myself that my hiring practices improved dramatically by just taking that step. So it doesn't mean that that person's hired just by taking a personality assessment, but what it does is it tells me that they've got the characteristics of being somebody that would fit on the team. And so that's proved very valuable, because what I discovered is that I was horrible at that beforehand. So I had pretty standard, I had a team of about 100 when I worked in rooftop solar. And I had pretty standard success rates, but middling at best, I think, is what most of us experience hiring. And I found that this process of doing a personality assessment showed me that how horrible I was, because I would think somebody's personality was like A, B, and C, and then I'd see black and white objectively. No, it's really like X, Y, and Z, and I just totally read that completely incorrect. And it was accurate over and over again, and so I just came to rely on that as kind of a screening tool to decide if somebody was a good fit to come into the business. Because I think most of us, unfortunately, are sort of the mindset that you're going to sit down with somebody and you're going to, by the whites of your eyes, decide if their character and their personality is such that they're going to fit on your team. And unfortunately, there's a lot that's under the surface that you're not getting in that conversation. And so just having an objective personality assessment was the way that I was able to remove that bias and help me tremendously.
Yeah, I love that. And let's say there's someone listening to this who says, you know what, I love that idea. I'm going to adopt that. A couple questions for you to help drill that down. At what stage in the hiring or recruiting process do you incorporate that test? Is it something someone takes before you even look at an application? How does that work?
No, I generally do like an email screener first. Oh, it depends on how many candidates I've got. Like if I had two people apply for a job, then I'm not going to force them to do a personality assessment before having conversations. But I with enough volume, I'll do an email screener, maybe a conversation initial after that email screener, and then personality assessment. But I won't really dig into like the technical side of the skills. So for me, one of the truisms that I believe is you hire for character and teach skill. I just have over and over again found that the character side can't be taught near as much. It can be kind of, but it's a much longer process, and I'm much more. I've had greater success in my career by surrounding myself that are with people that have high integrity first, and maybe don't know how to do something to teach them that, than vice versa.
Absolutely. And is it one of the standardized personality tests, like they'll say the Myers-Briggs, or is it something that you come up with yourself that people take?
I think Myers-Briggs could work. I think there's multiple ones out there. I have kind of a one that I've discovered that I keep as a trade secret. And that's because the company on the other end only takes clients by referral, and they've asked me specifically to kind of keep it that way. But I think that they're not the only ones that are out there. But I definitely would suggest that as a piece of advice for any entrepreneur hiring, is to find something, whatever it is, that's an objective screening criteria for you that removes your bias out of the hiring process.
There. Fascinating too. Okay. Well, I appreciate you sharing that. Would you be willing to share maybe some of the green lights that you would look for in a personality test that would indicate this person might be a good personality or cultural fit for the company?
Yeah, I think so. A couple of attributes that I really look for is one, especially work in a remote only environment, you need to be goal driven. I don't want to be surrounding myself with people that I have to task manage. That's just an incredible time drain on me, and frankly on the organization too, right? So at least the stage of growth we are now, maybe that changes in the future, but having people that are driven to be at work, to be on time, to accomplish tasks, like, and you can screen for that. So that's one. Accountability for the results. So, okay, I say I'm going to do X, Y, and Z by the end of the month. well, did you do it? If not, do I have to chase you to figure it out if you did or did not? Or are you going to just show up and say, hey, here it is, it's done ahead of time, or I need some more time? Like, just accountability um, is another one. I do also like to screen for the ability to give feedback, and that's kind of a
Give
unique
feedback.
one.
Okay.
Yeah, so there are what I've discovered is there's, and you may have experienced this in the workplace, but some people can take feedback, and I don't mean there's a difference between being an a-hole about something and providing
Sure.
some people some corrective, constructive criticism to help them grow. And there are people who, even with constructive criticism, take it super hard. And it's very difficult, or become very defensive about anything where you're trying to help them, and just see it as kind of an attack, right? And so looking for people that have a greater level of resilience to where it can be like, hey, cool, like, no problem. You made a mistake on this one. What can you do to do better? Like, and take that and grow from it. So it's an indication of being able to grow and have a desire to grow. Um, that's one that I look for. Another one I look for is just general aptitude. Making sure that, when conversations are happening in group settings, the people nod their heads are actually absorbing the information and can take it away and go execute on what everybody else thought that we were agreeing to. I think most of us have had the experience of, you're having a conversation with somebody and their head's nodding, and you think, cool, everybody's on the same page, and then they go do something completely different from what we all thought we were agreeing to go do. Right?
Mhm.
So just make sure that there's a general aptitude and those listening skills are there in a way that, the organization can be efficient with communicate initiatives and getting them executed.
That makes sense. Thank you for sharing that. I want to rewind a little bit here. I had a question that you may have answered a little bit with this personality assessment, but with the fact that you've got people across different continents, talking different workplace cultures, different cultural cultures, different expectations, how difficult for you is that to manage different expectations in different countries for what work and business looks like?
It's not, because this is going to sound weird, but one of the things that it's actually one of our core values is that we're a meritocratic organization, right? So we're a U.S. based company. And as such, the way that we've structured everything is kind of traditional meritocratic U.S. values. At the end of the day, what I think is really critical on this particular point that you're raising, and it is critical, is you're not trying to cater for everybody. I think that's a lost cause. What you're trying to do is create a fair set of rules for everybody to play the game of business together in. And as long as those rules are fair, then people can agree or disagree to play that game with you. And if the rules are unfair, and then it creates dynamic issues amongst team members. And so, for instance, I actually think that it would create more issues to try to cater to all the cultural needs than it would to simply say, look, we're a US based company. I know I've got members of the team in Spain, I'm in Peru. But if we're going to celebrate holidays, they're going to be US holidays. Full stop. I'm not going to try to celebrate holidays in every country. We're a US based company. So even though you're not located there, we're going to follow the holiday schedule. And this is just a simple one of the US, because otherwise it's not going to make sense if 3 members of the team that we have in Spain are celebrating Spanish independence while the rest of us are off. If you want to take a day off for that day, great, but we're a US based company. So this is the rules of the game that we're playing.
Mm-hmm. And how do you communicate those rules to someone when they come on board? How transparent are those rules?
They're pretty. So we, and as we grow and scale, I describe that as like the business infrastructure is slowly building out policies and kind of a handbook as things come up. Like I'm a big believer that in the early days of a business, like when you see an opportunity to create the structure then, but wait till you need to go create the structure. Like I think it would have been an utter waste of time to have gone off and just created an entire like HR handbook and said, this is what we believe in, versus just like incrementally adding the policies and needs as it became clear. Like, hey, Okay, we've all been adults here so far as an early stage startup. Like, let's just track how much time we're taking off rather than having a clear, like, vacation policy, and just to make sure that we're keeping it fair and balanced amongst one another and keeping the business growing to what the set goals and guidelines and expectations are. So it's a more adult environment. And that's again not for everybody, but it's also why the personality assessment is really kind of a critical thing to make sure that people are accountable and self-driven.
Certainly, it seems like a very, frankly, an authentic and organic way to build that quote unquote HR document. You're not just going on theory, you're going on what actual practice is. The one thing that we'll talk a lot about with our clients is creating a how I work document, which is more or less a user guide to the CEO. How do you interact? What are their expectations? And that should never be a complete document. It has to evolve over time. And it sounds like you're saying that the rules of the company and how it operates, those have to evolve over time as well as expectations are identified. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think that's fair, and I think that there's I think it's something that I misunderstood in my younger years in business, but an organization is a living, breathing thing. It's going to evolve, it's going to expand, it's going to contract. The expansion is the more fun, the contraction is the less fun, but the evolution of the business itself is going to mean that needs change. And if you're not keeping that in mind the entire time, then you're either going to get rejected by the organization itself, or you're going to be growing with that organization. And you can't take anything for granted. Like, even in my own role, I'll tell my guys, like, look, we're growing this, and we grew 350% last year, and on track to do something similar this year. If we get to a certain point where I can see that I'm not keeping up with the team, like, I'm not going to be surprised if the board of directors says, "Hey, we need a new CEO here." I would expect that, because at the end of the day, the goal of the organization is greater than any one member of the team, including the CEO.
Absolutely. I love that. And let's talk about your team just a little bit more here and your view as a leader within that team. You mentioned that you view people now as your tribe. And I'm curious, how do you show that in a day-to-day basis? What does leadership look like that shows your team that you view them as your people?
I think the biggest thing is just talking to them as people, and not trying to talk to them as with kind of a social hierarchy in mind. It's like, I think if you're operating in a non-consensual way, there are times where you have to just step in and, like, make decisions. Like, so the metaphor I think of is, I'm the captain on a ship, and think of the age of discovery when the first ships were sailing around the globe, right? Like, we've all agreed to be on this boat together, and the laws of physics are dictating, the activity on the boat and how we're sailing and all of that. And I'm the captain, but I'm fully reliant on everybody that's in the ship with me. And for the most part, I want everybody to understand the rules of engagement for their particular role on the ship and to be executing. And I'm going to be saying, hey, we need to go this direction, we need to go that direction. But for the most part, it's on each of them to do their respective roles to make the ship function. There are certain times, though, where the storm comes up, and you got to batten down the hatches, and the captain goes into overdrive and starts shouting orders, and everybody starts to listen and just have to do what they have to do. And you have to be willing to take that level of executive authority at the right time. But I believe, as a leader, that it is inappropriate to be in that mode all the time. You need to know when it is a survival situation or a critical time, and time to start throwing elbows and telling everybody what to do. But for the most part, if you're not giving people consensual opportunity to make decisions and have buy-in with the decisions for their particular role, you're just going to breed resentment in your organization, and they're eventually either going to look for the exits or mutiny on you. So, treat people with respect, and let them do their jobs. And then if a storm does come up, explain why the storm's there and what needs to be done to get out of it, and take the reign. And people will respect If you give them the slack, the rest of the time to do their jobs and to get the buy-in, they will respect when you have to come seize the helm and say, nope, this is what we got to do right now. They're good about that. That's been my experience.
Well, that's a great metaphor. Let's talk about the times then when we'll say there's not a storm raging. You've got calm seas, but you still have to have forward momentum on the ship.
Yeah.
How important is it for you as a leader, do you believe, to say provide motivation and fulfillment for the team versus how much of that is on them to they should have that intrinsically?
Um, so I definitely believe in more intrinsic than me being motivated. I guess the way I think about it is I keep a high bar, just have expectations of people. And generally when you tell people I expect this out of you, like people are going to try to rise to that, you know, instead of telling people what to do is just like, hey man, this is your roles and responsibility. I expect you to do them. Like when people buy on, like one of the things that I'm very clear about, again, back to kind of the rules of engagement is, I tell people, I tell people when I hire them, I'm like, hey, look, I'm a lazy boss. Like I don't want to look over my shoulder to make sure that you've done the thing that you said you're going to do. I, and I'm not genuinely lazy. Like I work long hours and stuff, but that is not the thing that I want to do is to look over my shoulder. Like I just expect that. And I expect these things from like communications, I expect responses within certain time frames and, just setting the rules of engagement. And this is the job description. This is what I'm hiring you to do. And this is kind of our contractual agreement between one another. If this is in your remit, then I expect you to be doing it, right? And if you have issues and when you talk about prioritization, I'm always open to those conversations. So I'm not unfair, but I have a high bar, I guess, is how I look at it. And generally, A players love that because it's clear rules of engagement, and A players like to push, they like to win,
Yeah.
and so you just set up the right dynamic and have people that want to win naturally, and you're going to start winning.
Very succinctly put. And I think if there's one thing I'm taking away from this, it's I think the importance of clarity, both the clarity when someone's coming in, their personality, you have a high degree of confidence are going to be a fit because you've walked them through a personality assessment and matched that with the team. Clarity on what the company culture is and what the cultural expectations are, and clarity around expectations. People need to know what is expected of them. And as long as they know that and they opt into it, you are completely safe to hold them accountable to it, right? They can't really be upset when they've opted in.
Yeah, that's it. That's it. It's a consent, and it's interesting because this is actually something that I think back to your earlier question about Bitcoin and how it's informed my leadership. This is probably one of the primary things is, Bitcoin is a network driven off of consensual behavior by all actors. You opt into it. You choose to operate into it. And the further I go in my career, the further I realize, like, if people consent to things, they step up when their side of the obligation is there in a very different way than than you're dragging them in because they don't want to be there in the first place and they're feeling obligated to be there. It's a completely different dynamic. When people are there of their own free will and capacity, you get the sort of behavior that you want out of that relationship and dynamic versus otherwise, if you're pulling that person in by obligation, it's just not going to work long term. You're both going to be frustrated and miserable.
Absolutely. And frankly, I don't think we could find a better mic drop moment to wrap this up on. I love going full circle back to what began this conversation. There was so much in here, I think, to take away both for me and for any listeners. Kent, I want to thank you for sharing your journey as a leader. It's great to have you on the show, and I appreciate your insights.
Yeah, thank you very much. Let me, I know that was kind of a mic drop moment, but I want to give probably the biggest insight I've had about leadership is just kind of maybe a double mic drop if that's possible. I've already dropped it.
Bring it on.
No, the biggest insight I've had in my personal career, and it's now 17 years, I think, of leadership that I've been working on, is that my leadership capability improved the more that I worked on myself. That's the single biggest thing that I've done that has made me a better leader, is to go inwards and find. So for whatever practices, whatever route you go, the inward journey is going to produce and yield dividends for you in your external reality, as a human and as a leader. So don't be scared to go work on yourself, because it will wind up producing greater results for you as a leader.
Beautifully said. I appreciate you adding that as our bookend moment here, and I couldn't agree more. Thank you, Kent.
You're welcome.